The Bucks got their first road victory of the season, defeating the Brooklyn Nets 129 to 125 in Brooklyn. Giannis was outstanding tonight with 36 points, and the Bucks bench mob came to play. We also saw more drop coverage amongst some other defensive coverages. So we're going to break down all of the action from tonight's win and more on tonight's episode of Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Appreciate you tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or first listen of the day. I'm your host, Camille Davis. You can catch me weekly on the Technical Foul podcast, as well as Cheesehead TV's Carry the G and MKE. Joining me is the founder of BrewHoop.com and longtime voice of the pod, Frank Madden. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Well, Brooklyn didn't have too much size tonight. No Nick Claxton, and Giannis led the way. It seems almost normal now that when Ben Simmons is across from Giannis, we should expect a big night from Giannis, it seems like. Tonight, Giannis had 36 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, and 7 3-point attempts, which in my book's a little too high. In addition to that, Dame came through with 21.7 assists, 6 rebounds, and Chris came through with 15 points, 4 assists, and 3 rebounds, not to be outdone by Jay Crowder, who had 15 points and 5 rebounds himself. It was a real team effort from these Bucks with 7 different guys scoring in double figures. The Bucks really seemed to lean on Giannis and Chris to end the game, and it was a really fun track meet there in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, kind of vintage Chris and Giannis, right? Batman and Robin, the old school version. I don't know what that makes Dame Lillard. Is he Alfred? I don't know, Camille. But we've seen Dame obviously have at least a couple of big takeovers late, including the game on Friday against the Knicks. But man, the kind of just recurring thing that I came away with from the end of that game was, man, it's nice to have Chris Middleton at a minutes limit where he can actually, like, they can get him still closing games. He was able to close the last 2 games. He had a key play late in the game on Friday in New York against the Knicks where he found Dame streaking to the basket for kind of that, kind of clinching and one play late. And tonight, you hit on it, right? I mean, we saw the pick and roll into a step back. We saw him draw a foul from a similar type of situation. We saw him again, the kind of chemistry that he and Giannis have. You hope that Dame can begin to build, like 50% of the kind of special chemistry that Giannis and Chris have developed over the years. The great look that he had off Giannis slipping a screen and diving to the rim, and Chris just kind of throwing the overhead pass to him. Chris never afraid to just throw the ball into the general vicinity of Giannis. And that was, again, just kind of part of that group being able to come back. They had the lead. It was 108-99. Giannis without Dame and with kind of a bench unit, which we saw at a couple different junctures, they were able to kind of late third quarter and beginning of the fourth quarter turn around a deficit. I think it was 89-79 at one point, and kind of chipped away. And yeah, just something about the energy with Giannis and that group. We've talked about in the past, so sometimes it feels like they don't have enough shot creation when they don't have, a point guard or a ball handler with them. But it just felt like having kind of more of the athletes. We saw Campaign out there to be a little bit of that kind of ball handling and kind of point guard play. And he hit a bunch of shots tonight and kind of gave them a nice shot in the arm. And then we saw, MarJon, Pat Connaughton, Jay Crowder, all of them. I think, again, this was not a great night for the defense. The point total that they gave up, I think, was indicative of, some of the challenges they had. But at times they were able to use, I think, when they had a little bit more mobility and athleticism, they were able to, I think, force misses and kind of force the Nets to get hurried up a little bit and give them a chance to get back in the game. And so, yeah, Bobby dives to the rim. Giannis, great pass, 108-99. Ooh, great. Okay, we're going to make this a comfortable game. and then Giannis goes to the bench, and very quickly, 12-0 run, I
Yep,
think immediately.
exactly.
And then they needed to bring Giannis back and then ultimately Chris back to close us out. But I looked at it. There are not a lot of pretty lineup combinations right now for the Bucks, Camille. Coming in this game, though, Giannis, Dame, and Chris were like +1 net rating. So you throw Chris Middleton in the mix. He's deodorant for a lot of very bad, gross, smelly lineups that we've been seeing from the Bucks early in the season. So yeah, Giannis obviously the big scoring night. Dame, and not his best, but got to the free throw line yet again to kind of paper over some of his shooting struggles. But yeah, to me, Chris Middleton, and that's what kind of got me excited about this game. Just the thinking, the feeling that like, man, when Chris gets ramped up to hopefully 30 plus minutes a game at some point in the near future, question mark. That will probably make me feel a lot better, at least about the Bucks offense. I don't know about the Bucks defense, but we saw tonight again, the firepower they have. They can put up a bunch of points themselves, and obviously at least that end of the floor is starting to look a bit more like what we expected.
It's starting to, for sure, and it's really interesting taking a look at that because we know a lot of Bucks fans have for years not seen the value in a Chris Middleton type of guy on this team. And with Dame coming aboard, there might have been some who even more said like, hey, we got Dame. Do we really need Chris? But one thing I love about watching Chris Middleton play basketball is that connector role that he plays. He just seems to be just so understanding of what the moment requires. Like there was a play there where he came in the game, he gets a switch, so he has a mismatch. I believe he had Cam Thomas on him at this point. So he's backing him down the post, and he uses that advantage to find someone else for three. It's just like he just uses every single aspect of the game. He's not the most athletic. He's not the quickest, and we all know that. But he has such high IQ. He hunts out mismatches, and even if he doesn't score off of it, he looks to make sure that his teammates can get a bucket out of that. So it was really nice seeing Chris get some fourth quarter minutes again in this game, closing it out with this group. It was also interesting seeing how that lineup switched a few different times there at the end, depending on what the Bucks were trying to do. When I saw Chris check in, I just said, yes, we get some closer Chris Middleton minutes. We had Chris out there with Giannis and Bobby. Jay had a lot of minutes in this one as well tonight, which is really interesting. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the Bucks bench and some of those minute combinations and things that we're noticing there as well. But when looking at the offense, of course, Giannis led the way. Actually, if you're watching on YouTube, we got some fresh graphics for you guys. So check this out. Giannis, player of the game. 36 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists. I mentioned that Giannis also did have 7 3-point attempts, which I mentioned is a little high for me. About 4 more threes than I would like to see him attempt in a game. And 4 of the threes that he took were on reload. So I'm thinking of the 1 3 that he actually made tonight where, Jay misses the 3, Bucks tip it back out, Giannis gets it, puts up a 3, misses it. Bucks another tip it back out to Giannis. He shoots again. And I'm sure I could not have been the only Bucks fan at that moment saying, no. And then he makes it and it's like, yes, okay. All right. Needed that bucket, tied the game back up in the fourth quarter. But there was a moment earlier in the game where I saw Giannis operating a little bit more of how I would love to see him when he has that space. Had the 3, looked at it and stepped in and took a beautiful mid-range jumper, knocked that down. But he also was able to get, just some action off of those 3s. Like he pump faked somebody out their shoes and got to the rim easily. And I was like, we're falling for Giannis pump fakes at the 3 now. It's interesting tactic, Brooklyn. I'm not quite sure about that one, but Giannis had a great game. Haven't mentioned Dame too much, but Dame also came through. As you mentioned, still hasn't quite found his shooting stroke, just 5 of 15 from the field, 2 of 8 from 3. But again, the free throws, 9 of 10 from the line. Got the free throw in clutch time where Giannis and Chris played some excellent defense down at the stretch. And Giannis wisely got the ball out of his hands and into the hands of Dame for some closing free throws there. And that was lovely to see. It's just fun to see the Bucks pull out a win. Still things to work on for sure, but it's always a lot better to be working on things out of a win rather than trying to work through things after a loss. And as I mentioned, I do want to talk to you more about the Bucks bench and some rotation things. But first, want to talk to you all about our good friends from FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sport book. Now, the Packers won, so Packer fans, we can talk about football happily again. And right now at FanDuel, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. You heard me, $150. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use, and there's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over and unders, plus more. So make sure that you visit fanduel.com/locked on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. We'll also like to encourage you all to tune back in to Locked On Bucks tomorrow. Justin and I will be having a show. And if you missed it, Justin also did the first pregame show for Locked On Bucks. So that's something that we're looking to do more regularly, with Justin leading the way on that. The hope is to have myself on there, maybe Frank sometimes we can get him on there before a game, breaking down matchups. So make sure that you guys are subscribed and tuned in to Locked On Bucks, because we have a lot of great content coming your way. All right, this Bucks bench. As I mentioned, we had 7 different guys scoring double figures this evening. With the bench mob, Jay Crowder definitely led the way. He's getting minutes that are really starter minutes, but he's just coming off the bench to start everything up. It's really interesting to see that. You also can take a look at the fact that, hey, Malik Beasley minutes are starting to go down. Only 14 for him this evening here in Brooklyn, and it's been a trend if you can take a look at his minutes over the last few games. I mean, he has been averaging over 20, and now he plays 14 in this game. And something else that was interesting is that I heard Adrian Griffin mention the fact that, hey, I got to try to find a way to get Bobby some more playing time. Got to try to find a way. And this evening, we saw that Bobby was one of the first subs off the bench alongside Jay Crowder. And Bobby also saw an increase of his minutes in comparison to where he's been throughout most of this season. So Griff is still trying some different things out, playing around with minutes, playing around with rotations. We saw Brooke come off the floor there at the end of the game a bit for Bobby in order to play more of that switching defense, play a little bit smaller. We saw Cam Payne have an excellent night. 4 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3. Pat Connaughton, another good night for him as well from the field, 4 of 7. And MarJon came in, although he didn't have a big scoring load. MarJon definitely provided some energy on the defensive end for the team. So Bucks bench, they called themselves Bench Mob a few years ago, and they came up big tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny with the Crowder, story, right? I mean, so far this season, I mean, Jay made 4 of 9 threes tonight, and his 3-point percentage went down because he came in averaging shooting 56% from 3. So obviously he's not going to shoot that well forever. But you know, you think about just his experience last year. I mean, I think people gloss over the fact that he actually, like, his stats were actually like really good in the short period he had in the regular season. But, I think the same thing's going to be true this year. Even if he plays well in the regular season, fortunately, he'll get a full year, barring a trade, to kind of do that this year versus last year, kind of just showing up, obviously, after the deadline, not having played, maybe not being the shape that he wanted to. But again, the cauldron of the playoffs is going to be where ultimately everybody kind of judges his value. And, I don't know that we're learning a whole lot about how playable he's going to be, against really good wings in the playoffs so far. But I thought it was interesting. I mean, we saw on Friday against the Knicks, Griff put him on Jalen Brunson in the fourth quarter at
Mhm.
various points. We saw them try to do that a bit tonight against Cam Thomas in the fourth quarter. I mean, it's not that like they're expecting him to just lock him down, but part of it, I think, is just to like then give some kind of more physical look, just sort of um, change how how that guy that you're playing has to attack, and especially Brunson, right? Brunson's not like
Yeah.
a super fast or athletic guy. Cam Thomas, I think, is obviously quicker than Brunson, and it seemed like Brunson was sort of having a hard time figuring out how to attack Jay with his size and physicality before ultimately they kind of went back to some more traditional look. So, um, I mean, credit to Jay Crowder. I Beasley, the numbers, even when he's shot the ball well, we talked about he had the good game in Toronto, shooting the ball, one of the few Bucks that did. But the numbers so far this season, I mean, the lineups with him in it and Dame in particular, I think they're like a minus 18 net rating together. The offense has been bad. The defense has been bad. The offense, again, I mean, there's no reason why the offense can't work with Lillard and Beasley out there with whomever, right? But clearly, like, there's something not clicking there. And I think, I don't know. I'm curious what John Horace in the front office. I mean, did they tell Beasley like, hey, if we move Grayson Allen, like we'd look at you as the likely kind of next in line to start? I don't know. It's an interesting question, like how Beasley came to be the guy that was the opening night starter who was going to be given this task of defending the other team's best wing player. Maybe it made more sense when Drew Holiday was around.
I think so.
And you could say like, well, Beasley's going to be kind of the floor stretcher, and you're not going to have to worry about him defensively as much because you got Drew Holiday. But clearly, the combination, I mean, Lillard and Beasley, on paper, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In practice, it hasn't made much of any sense. And so I think what we're seeing here, tonight and in general, just from a trend perspective, they got to figure out a way to keep those guys not playing together as much. And so I think the obvious question becomes, what's the next version of the starting lineup that we're going to see? And I think, we've obviously talked a lot about MarJon Beauchamp, who had, again, I'd say another kind of encouraging spell of minutes tonight. Didn't, put up any big numbers or anything.
Plus 18 on the night though, Frank.
Yeah, he was part of that group that I thought had some good, just defensively, they actually had some athleticism and they were able to kind of run with Giannis a bit. Should have had a breakaway dunk, but loading up off 2 feet, he travels. Sad. Did make his only 3-point attempt. And something that with MarJon, he had kind of a rep as being a defensive playmaker in the G League. So coming to this game, I think he played 62 minutes. He didn't have a single block or steal. Tonight, he was credited with his first steal of the season. And so yay. Okay, so we got something there. I think he had 8 fouls, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, no steals, and no blocks in 62 minutes. So he was shooting the ball really well. He has shot the ball from 3 really well so far this season, which, we always say is well, that's the thing that's going to flip MarJon from being, a guy that is struggling to find minutes versus a guy that is going to play every night if he's making 3-pointers. But I think it's an interesting question. I mean, given the way that Griff has used him as typically being a guy that's defending smaller players, I think in principle, you'd look at MarJon and say, well, he's kind of the obvious guy to start in Beasley's stead here. But I don't know, maybe it's going to be Jay Crowder, right? I mean, I think Jay Crowder's been overall the kind of steadiest guy off the bench, if we're going to be honest. And he's not going to shoot as well as he has all season long. But, he's a vet. He knows how to play regular season in particular. Some of the concerns you'd have from a matchup perspective just aren't going to be as probably as big of a deal. So honestly, wouldn't shock me at all if you did see Crowder as the 5th starter. I think the one kind of thing about that is he has been the primary backup for Chris. So if you're starting both of them, then staggering them becomes a little bit harder, especially while Chris is on a bit of a minutes restriction. But given Chris is now at, call that 20-21 minutes a night, he's kind of bumped up that level. I can't remember where it was. I think there was an interview where I think Chris suggested maybe by game 7 or 8 or so, maybe it was with Chris Haynes, that he'd hopefully be back up to kind of a normal complement of minutes. So we're at game.
We are at game 6, with that being in the book, with the Bucks being 4-2. Frank has done our annual
is the principal thing. Oh, am I back?
Welcome back.
Am I back? Yeah.
You're back.
I'm literally, I can see my router, people. I say this like every episode, but it's just very frustrating. I'm on a laptop. I can see my router. I've got 500 Mbps, and I'm still freezing every episode. This happens to me on work calls though too. So in fairness, my internet sucks whether I'm podcasting or
Doesn't discriminate.
talking for work. Just doesn't discriminate. But yeah, so long story short, I think Jay Crowder, MarJon Beauchamp, whatever, man. Adrian, pick one of those dudes. We can usher Malik back to the bench and maybe find a different role for him. In principle, his shooting should work in some configuration, but for whatever reason, I think they just need to change up the vibes with the starting group is just
Yeah.
bad, and he's the obvious guy to switch out because he's the fifth guy.
I couldn't agree more. And Marjan or Jay would be one of the two guys that I would also suggest in that starting role. By now, the everydayers know, and I know you know, I'm a Marjan stan, so I would love to see it be Marjan, but I wouldn't be mad with it being Jay. Jay is somebody who, when the Bucks re-signed, I said this is going to be an interesting signing here because when we saw him in this time last year with Bud, the jump shot looked fine. He was knocking down his jumpers, but he seemed just a little bit slow laterally, especially in the playoffs against the Heat,
Yeah.
where it just felt like I'm not sure if this is because, he spent most of the season at home. I'm not sure if this is indicative of his future talent level. Like, are we starting to see a decline? Which Jay Crowder are we going to get? And the Bucks so far this season have seen a very motivated a Jay Crowder that can really help them win some games. So you love to see that. And as I mentioned, Marjan was plus 18 this evening, team best for the Bucks. And when I think about Beasley, the thing that he brings to the team is that shooting ability. He went 1 of 5 for the night, but I shouldn't say too much about him because a lot of our 3-point shooting this evening came from our Bucks or from our bench mob. So the bench scored 50 points tonight. They were 11 of 21 for 3, while the starters were 5 of 27. So there is something to that with Jay having such a hot shooting night, Campaign having a great shooting night, Bobby knocking down his, I believe, only 3 or 1 of 2 for the evening.
First of the
Beauchamp.
season. That was his
Yes,
first
first
three-pointer of the
3 of the
season.
season. That
I
is
know.
crazy to think about. But it's here. Maybe that lid's going to be off for Bobby, and we see a more normal production level from him from 3. So, yeah, shout out to the bench mob this evening. And as we kind of alluded to throughout the show already, we did see a few different defensive schemes. We saw in our last game that the Bucks went, hey, we're going back drop against the Knicks. And it was an interesting team to make that decision against, given the fact that Jalen Brunson is the kind of player that can really eat up a drop. One might argue that, Cam Thomas also can eat up a drop with his game. And we saw him drop 45 tonight, but that's not because the Bucks were solely in that drop coverage. We saw a few different schemes from the Bucks tonight, and I would love to go more in depth about that. But first, I want to talk about Chase Medical. So we spend a lot of time talking, you and I, listener to host. We spend a lot of time talking, and we get fired up together on wins and losses, on who starts and sits, as we've indicated through this episode, as well as our last few. And I'm thankful for that connection. But today I want to chat about something a little bit more personal. I just recently learned that you can get a 1-year supply on ED medications. So do you realize what that means? You can bring on extended travel, bring on the next natural disaster, even the next supply chain issue, because you are covered. You won't have to worry about whether or not you can refill your generics for Cialis or Viagra. And this is possible because of our friends at Jase Medical. Go online right now at jasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply on your daily medication. Remember to use promo code Locked On at checkout for a discount as well. A verified customer had this to say about Jase. Quote, I am thankful for the service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut pills and have to have it. Ordered most of my daily meds with the year supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit and I feel secure now. Prices are lower than local pharmacies and I highly recommend this for everyone. So if you or someone you love would like to get a peace of mind by having a year's supply of any daily med, go to jasemedical.com and see if it's offered for you. Remember to use the promo code Locked On for $20 off of your purchase. All right. Those defensive schemes I mentioned, we saw some drop, we saw some zone, we saw some switching, and each of those different schemes had different levels of success depending on who was out there. As we mentioned, that third quarter crew that was in the zone with Marjan and Bobby and Giannis, and I believe it was Cam out there with him and Jay. They had really good energy, really good activity. We saw that a lot. We saw a few 3-second calls get called again on the Bucks while they were in that zone at various points. But we talked about Griffin not being somebody who's scared to change things up or try different things out. And we saw it in this game in particular with a lot more zone than I can recall the Bucks running in recent memory.
Yeah, and I thought I think they started I think in the second quarter maybe they brought it out, and I thought it was just a good change of pace. I mean, I
Yeah.
always view zone as, a change of pace it's a changeup pitch. It's not something that you want to, be using heavily and relying on as, anything like your base defense or anything like that. But especially, tonight where it just felt like the Nets got into a bit of a rhythm in terms of being able to attack some of the matchups. Cam Thomas getting loose, it felt like the zone was a good way to, again, kind of take the ball out of his hands a little bit, force them to try to work it around the perimeter a bit. And again, it's just, they're professionals. We see it when teams run zone against the Bucks, right? Sometimes, again, just teams are not used to playing against a zone the way they are man to man. And so I thought it was a nice change of pace. I'd be curious though, the kind of end stats on it, whether ultimately it was as effective, especially as the game wore on. To me, the longer you run it, the more teams tend to figure it out. And so I thought kind of over time as the game wore on, it got a bit less effective. But I think, one of the things that I do want to talk a little bit about is when we think about the defense. This was not, as much as Friday was a game where Brook was awesome and seeing him back in the drop, right? The players basically bullied Adrian Griffin into going back to what they've done for years under Bud. So I'm glad Adrian Griffin was willing to let himself be bullied by whichever players came to him and basically said, dude, you got to let Brook play drop. But when your adjustment is go do what Bud did, I'm not going to give you a lot of credit for that. I'm glad you did it. I'm not going to give you credit though. Okay. But yeah, it's interesting. The longer we kind of see this group, tonight was certainly not a nice night in terms of the defensive stats. I think they were at I think close to a 120 defensive rating. So I think they came into the game like 27th or 28th in terms of defensive rating tonight. Not great. I think the upside, hey, half court Bucks were 112 points per play in half court, which is terrific. Brooklyn was about 106, and that's points per play, so it doesn't include like offensive rebounds. So Brooklyn and the Bucks were both really good in terms of half court tonight. And the funny part is that the Nets actually were okay in transition, which has been the Bucks' biggest problem. I mean, honestly, okay is we probably take it at this point. The Knicks thankfully were awful, and the Bucks were both awful in transition on Friday. We're used to the Bucks being for some reason horrific in transition. They were again tonight. This cleaning the glass stat I always like to use, which is basically looking at kind of like the frequency with which you basically take attempts in transition and the effectiveness, like the points per play. When you do that, you kind of aggregate those two together. Bucks ran very little tonight and were extremely ineffective. They had a 75 points per play average per 100 in transition. So literally the Bucks are the only team in the league right now who have a negative points added from transition, which is because they are better in half court than in transition, which,
who would have thought?
It's not going to, that never happens over a full season. It's not going to happen. I'm pretty confident with this team, but again, they just are. I can't even explain like why they can't do it. Right. Just like random stupid stuff. Jay Crowder missing a layup, a game or two ago against the Raptors. I think like, Marjan traveling, when he's got a breakaway tonight. Just stupid stuff like that. Right. With Giannis, like the Bucks were not a great transition team last year, but they were not hurting themselves by running last year. So that'll kind of turn around a little bit. I think the big question though is can their defense get cleaned up in transition? And I think though, looking at this game tonight, to me, two of the real highlight plays of this game, Ben Simmons hit ahead for Dorian Finney-Smith. I can't remember how many seconds were left. What was it like? It was under 24. Yeah. And after the Bucks got the ball back, they fouled Dame. So it was inside 30 seconds, but it was this hit ahead pass and Bucks were up, I believe 2. And kind of, he catches it a little awkwardly and Giannis is bearing down on him. And we obviously know what Giannis is able to do as a chase down guy. And Giannis, at that point is playing the 5. And again, it would be fitting, given how poorly the Bucks have defended in transition, that they would give up, a head-to-head pass for the tying basket in this situation. But Giannis is an incredible transition defender, arguably the most like destructive transition defender and offensive player in the league on both ends. And just his presence, I was curious. It looked like he might have gotten a piece of Finney Smith's shot.
I thought so.
He was not credited for a block,
Mm-mm.
which, of course, hurts me as the unofficial Giannis block stat keeper. But then the next play down, Cam Thomas driving under the basket. Giannis contests him. Again, Giannis playing center in that smaller lineup. They had pulled the big guys for mobility. Giannis does get credited with a block. He got a piece of the Cam Thomas shot, and they're able to salt away the win with free throws. So, I think that's the one question. I think obviously we have concerns about Adrian Griffin's management of Brook Lopez. Hopefully the game on Friday was indicative of him kind of cutting loose Brook a bit more. Tonight was a weird one because you had Ben Simmons, who obviously you do not need to be out on at all. But as you said, with the perimeter scoring that they had, the Nets were our team that obviously can get into the mid range. And I mean, they were 19 of 33 on mid range shots tonight, which is one of those sort of things where you just sort of tip your cap between Thomas and Mikal Bridges. They were just lethal. And again, it kind of was what it was. But, kudos to Adrian Griffin, right? He didn't lean heavily on Brook, and he was willing to go small in order to kind of better match up, especially when Ben Simmons was off the court. And ultimately, Giannis, those 3-point shots, Camille, I mean, not just did he take did he have like, 2 instances where he took back-to-back threes in a set. First half he misses 2. Fourth quarter he ends up hitting the second one to tie it at 115. In that fourth quarter possession, he had Dame Lillard right over on his left wing with an open 3 look. He doesn't look at him. He doesn't give him the ball. He takes the shot himself. And I'm generally like fairly tolerant of Giannis, getting up a couple threes a game, whatever, let him have his fun. But in this game tonight, especially with how effective he was inside the arc, he was 15 out of 20 on twos. It just felt, especially in that first half, I think he was 0 for 4 in the first half. It's just like, man, like you got to put your ego aside, dude.
Yeah.
This game is too close. It's one thing if you're up by 15 and you walk into a 3 or something like that, but I don't know. It's just frustrating because, Giannis is getting older. And honestly, it's almost like what I just thought of was, you remember when Brett Favre was getting older and it was like, well, maybe he'll settle down and, as his arm starts to go a little bit, he'll kind of make
opposite.
better decisions. Nope. Just do dumber shit. It just, sometimes with Giannis and the shot selection, it's just like, you don't have to do this, man. Like you don't have to do this. We know you're setting more. We know you're gonna have to set more screens this year, but like you don't have to shoot all these jump shots. And credit to him, he hit a number of mid-range jumpers tonight. But man, I don't know. Like it's one of those things when he hits that second 3, it's almost like, man, I'm glad it went in.
Exactly.
But I really hope his takeaway is not that, hey, it's great. I just kept at it, and eventually I hit the big 3, and I got to do that. I got to keep shooting those threes. Like, dude, you don't need to take 7 threes. So that part definitely left something to be desired. But when he wasn't shooting that threes, and he was focusing on trying to be aggressive, he was electric, and it was fun to watch. And honestly, I mean, there have been long stretches of the season so far. It's early, obviously. Giannis has had some slow starts in the past, so it's not like this is some brand new thing he's in. But I don't know, he really has not been as fun to watch as like we're used to, right? And we're spoiled because he's incredible in the things he does, defy belief at times. But it's just, I don't know, he's been struggling to figure out the short rolls and the decision making. He's kind of hesitating a lot, awkward turnovers, things like that. We saw a fair bit of that against the Knicks on Friday. You mentioned pump faking threes. He had the three-pointer. He was fouled on in the fourth quarter. He misses all 3 free throws. So there's just been, a lot of hiccups so far this season, and at the core of it, obviously, is kind of trying to figure that things out with Dame. But tonight, when he was right, and it was on both ends. And ultimately, he was great from late third quarter. I think at one point he was like 8 out of 17 after he missed a couple more threes. He was 8 out of 17. And what did he finish up with? 15 to 27. So yeah, you kind of do the quick math, right? So he had 7 shots and 7 out of 10 to finish the game, and probably was fouled on 1 or 2 of
Yeah.
those misses as well. So and he made free throws tonight too. So got to shout that out because I do enjoy
Yes.
a made free throw. So
Yes.
so yeah, again, you always got to probably take a little bit of the bad with all of that good with Giannis. But fortunately, they were able to kind of figure it out when they needed to. And 4-2. Hey, the Boston Celtics lost in Minnesota tonight, so the
Love
Celtics
to
are
hear it.
5-1. So I mean, Bucks, for as much as they've looked awful in their 2 losses and have looked okay, like okay in their wins. As we've been talking about, right? Like a lot of at this point is just man, at this point, like just grind out wins and hopefully you kind of figure stuff out as you go and
Yeah.
you get a little more fluency offensively and hopefully start to figure some things out defensively. But again, it's definitely a lot of work still left for this team, especially with the transition stuff on both ends. And I think we are all waiting to see when that eventual change to the starting lineup happens. But hey, if they keep winning games, I guess there's going to be less pressure to do something, but we'll see. We'll see kind of what happens with that.
Yeah. Well, luckily we got a Bucks win tonight. We're going to wrap up the show and get out of here. As a reminder, make sure that you guys tune in to Locked on Bucks tomorrow as well. Justin and I will be getting together and putting out a show for that. And don't forget to subscribe or follow the show on YouTube or wherever it is that you're listening right now so that you can always get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. All right, guys, we'll catch you all tomorrow. Be safe.